go ahead and start with announcements because it's already 7 o'clock, and then I'll hand it over to you. But for Paul and Bethany, I'm doing announcements for the benefit of recording, and that way when everybody else watches it later, they'll know what's going on. My first announcement is there's a super duper important meeting on January 9th. That meeting, we will start discussing permanent club officers and also our president-elect and president nominees. So if all club members could be present for that meeting, that would be incredible. If not, I will send out either minutes or you can also view the YouTube video from that meeting. The second thing is we just had our foundation dinner on Saturday at the Skelton Inn at Virginia Tech. It was a huge success. We had 125 in attendance, and this year we went for a theme, and our theme was celebrating a polio-free Africa. We had Mike McGovern as our main speaker, and we had several from within the zone and outside of our district that attended the foundation dinner. I got to wear a dress that was made for me 4 years ago, and it was a little tight in areas, but that's okay. There's pictures on Facebook if you want to see them. We did have a photographer that night, so hopefully Rotary District 7570 will have pictures up soon enough for that. I don't really remember much of the evening because I was running around so much, but my favorite parts of the evening were we had a Congolese band there performing original African music, and the lead singer Feaston is a good friend of ours, and he is Congolese. He's from Bukavu, I'm sorry. And my friend Peter Verbeek, who went to Ghana with us, went over and spoke their native tongue to them, which is Swahili, and that was super overwhelming for me. I almost broke down in tears because they, living in Roanoke, do not have that much except for with my friend Robin, so that meant a lot to them. And so they performed during cocktail hour, and then they had one performance during the dinner. Mike McGovern was an incredible speaker, definitely pulled at the heartstrings, and also Stephanie Urchin spoke, but she spoke at our fireside chat. We did things a little bit differently this year, and so next year we're hoping to bring the same things in that we did this year, but also have a different theme. So if you have any ideas, we're kind of looking for something fun like a beach theme, or maybe celebrating India, which would be more casual. And we're also hoping to keep the cost down to keep it more inclusive so we can get younger members and Rotaractors in there. So that's what happened Saturday night. And like I said, moving forward with the new year, we probably need to have a discussion on what the E-Club looks like, our permanent name, and how we see it moving forward. I have been, I have accepted to be the Public Image Chair for District 7570, and that will be a 2-year commitment, so I definitely cannot be president the upcoming Rotary year. So that's what we'll be discussing on January 9th. And again, super important that I have all members there, and I think that is all I have on my list at the moment. Oh, also, you will be billed for your second part of your dues in February. The invoice comes out in January, which, you know, I will pay, and then I will invoice each of you individually for your dues, and that will be your second part. With your dues, as I have mentioned before, you are sustainers. So your dues that will be paid in February, you will be 100% sustainer instead of just 50%. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to John Nanny, who's incredible.
Well, thank you so much. I read my presentation. One of the reasons is the post-polio syndrome aspects that I have really affect my short-term memory. And although I've given a talk about 175 times, not the same material, but you know, it really affects my ability to remember and memorize things. So please excuse me for reading it. Over 9 years, I gave my first polio talk to the Rotary Club of Hamilton Township near Trenton, New Jersey. And surprisingly, they even asked me to join. I often felt that I was preaching to the choir, but quickly learned that although most Rotarians are extremely dedicated to eradicating polio, they often know very little about polio and almost nothing about post-polio syndrome, never knowing the lifelong struggles of a polio victim. So again, thank you for inviting me to talk to your club. Today I'll be talking about polio in my life, the plus in Polio Plus, the importance of vaccinating, and what it takes to fund Polio Plus. Polio was one of the most feared infectious diseases in the 20th century, and the summer of 1953, where hospital polio wards were filled with dreaded iron lungs like these, help polio victims breathe. Here's a bank of iron lungs with people stacked on top of one another. Here's a baby only months old in an iron lung. Well, a strange thing was happening, or should I say not happening, in 1953. Summer rituals. Public swimming pools were closed, Little League fields in many towns were empty. You know, it was, mothers didn't have their kids with them while grocery shopping. This is where you say, ah. Here's this is me just before I started to walk. What's interesting in this photo is what's missing. My mom refused to have my leg braces photographed. I suspect that for fear of people would ostracize me and my family because I had polio. I was paralyzed from my neck down at 10 months old, only 6 months before the Salk vaccine was widely distributed. But my great aunt was a nun, and she had spent most of her life in working in hospitals. And she could read a hospital chart, and she saw that, you know, there was a polio epidemic at the time, and it was in Binghamton, New York. And, you know, the hospital ward was filled with polio patients, and she read it, my chart, and that I was not getting the care I needed. And she knew of Sister Kinney, a Australian nurse. In Australia, they called their nurse a sister. So my mom took Sister Kinney's physical therapy course, which was developed to give physical therapy to polio victims while they were paralyzed so that their muscles didn't atrophy. Because my mom did this, I walked a year later. My brother, who would take you know, the example from my parents and lean me up against the refrigerator and encourage me to walk. But unlike my parents, when I started to fall, he didn't catch me. So eventually, out of self-defense, I put my foot out to stop myself from falling. And to this day, he takes credit for teaching me how to walk. But basically, as years went by, I got to the point where most people would never have guessed I had had polio. I had a fairly normal childhood, and I actually played baseball, basketball, and football in high school. However, my coaches didn't know I had had polio, and they always yelled at me and often called me lazy. It was a very frustrating time in my life. That was polio for a lot of people. I was one of the lucky ones. Many young adults and children died or grew up paralyzed or had an arm or leg that was significantly smaller because their muscles did atrophy. I have many friends that got polio when they were older. I was blessed because I don't remember having polio. My mom would tell me how I would scream in pain when she stretched my muscles while she was exercising while I was paralyzed. For those who were older when they got polio, they remember all too well the pain and how they suffered from multiple painful corrective surgeries because their muscles did atrophy. One friend even had their good leg shortened 5 inches to match their polio leg so they could walk without a significant limp. When I turned 40, I started having renewed muscle weakness, joint pain, and extreme fatigue. Eventually, after seeing 10 different doctors in 2 years, many doctors had never seen a polio patient, I was finally diagnosed with post-polio syndrome. Many never get a diagnosis of post-polio syndrome and suffer without knowing why. 14 years later, I'm confined to a wheelchair for most of my mobility. To avoid overuse, I restrict my steps to a couple hundred steps per day. Many days each step is very painful. However, I've learned that there's very little I can't do. I just have to find a different way of doing it. Again, I was one of the lucky ones, born in the United States. If I was born in a developing country with the severity that I had polio, I wouldn't be here today. So for every child we save from polio, if they survive the initial polio virus attack, we truly are saving them from a life of pain and suffering. I'm lucky I live in a world where there are organizations like Rotary International with Rotarians like yourself who care about the welfare of others and who put service above self. So count your blessings. I'm assuming that most of you had your vaccinations when you were younger, protecting you from childhood diseases. There are some who cannot be vaccinated due to medical reasons, some because of conditions like cancer where they're going through chemotherapy, they have a compromised immune system. And young babies who can't get the MMR vaccine until they're 12 months old. We have to protect them, and that's why it's important to have the majority of people around that person be vaccinated, thus creating what's called the herd immunity. For polio, you need at least 85% of the population vaccinated to create this needed herd immunity. Unfortunately, every 60 seconds, a child dies from a preventable disease. 1,500 kids die every day in the world from vaccine preventable diseases. But according to Bill Gates, for every dollar spent on childhood immunizations, you get $44 in economic benefits. That's the cost reductions of having to treat a sick person and the productivity that that person will have throughout their life by not having these diseases. So from 125 endemic countries in 1985, with 350,000 cases of polio, paralytic polio, almost 1,000 cases of paralytic polio a day, down to 117 cases of wild polio so far in the world this year, 23 in Afghanistan, and a very, very large number compared to last year, 94 in Pakistan. Pakistan last year had 12 cases of wild polio. However, in reality, they didn't, because the previous government, through corruption and not wanting to report cases, not vaccinating, they let their guard down. There are areas that had been going, having had polio cases for many, many unreported polio cases for many, many years. The new government of Pakistan is very much on board. You had mentioned Michael McGovern, and he's gone there a number of times, and he's an incredible person and really an incredible person to lead our fight to end polio. And he is confident that the new government of Pakistan will go into those areas. They will be vaccinating those areas, and hopefully Pakistan's numbers will substantially drop in 2020. As you can see, Nigeria has been polio-free for over 3 years. That means all of Africa is polio-free. And I think the next time that the Global Polio Eradication Initiative meets in a formal meeting, they will be declaring Nigeria eradicated. It's a great effort. The obstacles, especially with Boko Haram, hurting the situation of being able to get into areas to vaccinate. It was very, very hard. So Rotary has helped prevent more than 18.5 million cases of polio, avoiding 2 million deaths while raising more than $3 billion. And every year, Rotary helps vaccinate 450 million children in developing countries. That's not counting like North America and South America and Europe and a lot of Asia that has routine vaccinations for their children. This is 450 million children in developing countries, an incredible effort. So, as you know, on October 24th was World Polio Day, and they announced a great achievement. Polio type 3. There's 3 strains of polio, type 1, 2, and 3. Type 2 had been declared eradicated a couple of years ago. Type 3, on October 24th of this year, they declared polio type 3 eradicated. And like I said before, Nigeria being polio free for 3 years. A lot of very positive news. But until polio is eradicated, it is a world threat. And because there's no cure for polio, vaccination is the only protection. I pray that eradication of polio happens soon so that all kids around the world will avoid what happened to many like myself when a vaccine was not available. We still have a long fight, because here's a global aviation map of flights in a 24-hour period. Each line is a plane ride. You can hardly see North America or Europe. You can see that we are only a plane ride away from polio case coming back to the United States if we don't vaccinate and we don't eradicate polio. Combined with the hesitancy throughout the world of vaccinating and sensational news headlines like this one, anti-vaxxers are thrilled with this headline, but the end of the first paragraph actually proves that vaccines work. Vaccines have reduced wild polio down to the point that vaccines, which cause more cases than wild polio, and that's only 1 in 2.8 million kids vaccinated. So these kind of headlines really hurt our cause, because anti-vaxxers are using it, saying that, well, see, vaccines cause more problems. So I want to switch what a lot of people have not really heard about, and why it's Polio Plus and what the plus in Polio Plus is. Today, Polio Plus represents so much more vaccinating kids. It also reflects the fact that the infrastructure, fundraising, and advocacy methods developed for the polio eradication campaign also supports efforts to fight other infectious diseases. A prime example of that is the role that Polio Plus played in the past. 2 out of the past 3 years, there's been Ebola outbreaks in Africa, mainly in Nigeria, and Polio Plus has been a major factor in stopping that Ebola from becoming a pandemic both times. That's just one of the ways. Here's a polio survivor in Nigeria. He used to have to travel miles to get water for his herd. Polio Plus drilled boreholes in his village, and now he gets clean water for his herd and his family without traveling miles. A few months ago in India, NID workers and volunteers vaccinated more than 32 million children in one weekend. These immense NID vaccination campaigns are also changing societies in Muslim countries by employing women to go house to house vaccinating children. In the Muslim religion, a man cannot enter a home if the man of the house is not there. A woman can. Therefore, by employing women to do the vaccinations, less children are skipped and more kids are vaccinated, and the number of women in the workforce are increasing, thus changing societal views on women working in outside of the home. In areas that have malaria, mosquito nets are given out during NIDs, preventing many cases of malaria. This polio survivor had no way of financially supporting himself. And he was called one of the what people call crawlers on the streets with no income. Polio Plus taught him how to make hand-driven bikes that allow polio survivors to get around without dragging themselves on the ground. He started a business making these tricycles. Here's one of the recipients of these hand-driven bikes. They're really incredible, and he now is employing other polio survivors and thus helping them get off the streets and stop from having to crawl. So basically, you know, show me the money. A lot of people don't really get the breakdown of what goes on with the money that you donate to Polio Plus. It's an incredible effort. Over $690 million a year is spent on eradicating polio. And we hear so much about the vaccines, and amazingly, vaccines are really only 3% of the total cost of eradicating polio. There is so much more involved in this effort. That is the largest public-private health initiative the world has ever seen. Research costs $16.6 million, 2% of the funding that it takes to vaccinate. Research done by Georgia Tech and a researcher in Australia, funded by the Gates Foundation, have been working on microneedle patches. Right now, to mass vaccinate children like they did a couple of months ago in India, 32 million children in one weekend, you cannot have enough medically trained people to do the injectable polio vaccine that has the dead polio virus. So you have to rely on the oral polio vaccine that has a live attenuated virus in it. This patch has thousands of water-soluble micro needles in it. You basically can train somebody to put like a Band-Aid on a kid's arm, push the middle of the Band-Aid, and the kid within 5 minutes is vaccinated with the injectable polio vaccine. And in fact, the trials that have gone, they're finding that they only have to use a small percentage of what they normally in the injectable vaccine in order to get the same results. A lot of positive things. Another thing that they've research-wise is coming out with an oral polio vaccine that cannot mutate and cause polio. So once that comes out of human testing, that will make a major, major change in the efforts to eradicate polio. So social mobilization is used to raise awareness of the vaccine campaigns and the benefits of immunization. Unfortunately, Afghanistan and Pakistan has the internet, and they see what anti-vaxxers, take small bits and pieces of information and change it to where, it makes it look like the vaccine is dangerous. There's other aspects of it that have caused problems and caused a lot of hesitancy on the vaccines in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So a lot of money is spent on changing ideas, going to imams and getting them to issue fatwas for vaccines rather than against vaccines. Surveillance is probably one of the, other than the vaccine itself, one of the most important aspects of eradicating polio. Because the polio virus lives outside of the human body in fecal matter, poor sanitation areas must be tested to find where the polio virus is circulating. Once they find the actual polio virus in the environment, they can actually do genetic testing and really bring it down to almost the block where that polio virus came from. It's amazing effort that they're doing. Then you have the technical assistance, including salaries for health and immunization professionals, and also, um, you know, the cost of what they call the cold chain from the time that the vaccine is manufactured and is transported to the locations is a big step. Many hands are in it, and they have to make sure that the oral polio vaccine is at a certain temperature. You know, it's really incredible effort. We don't know all of the things, people climbing over mountains to get to villages and things like that. The biggest cost is the operational support. It includes the stipends for millions of community-based vaccinators going house to house. Here's a picture of the cold chain that I was talking about. You know, just incredible pain and all of that. So as you can see, besides just the vaccine, there's a lot involved in eradicating polio. And this is where you come in. You know, your district has an incredible history of supporting Polio Plus. Please continue your efforts to raise awareness and funds. It's, you know, an incredible operation. It will morph into, once polio is eradicated, into eradicating so many more diseases. We've learned how to do it. We have the infrastructure, and we just need people to not give up on polio and to work that. So never underestimate your individual efforts or ideas. And remember to be the inspiration, because Rotary connects the world. And let's end polio now. Thank you for listening to my story. Be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So, John, when I saw you in DC, can you explain your wheelchair to me? Because it seemed like it could take you from sitting to upright. Is that correct? Like standing up?
Well, not standing up, but it brings me up to where I don't have to use my stomach muscles to actually stand up. It raises I tell people I have trouble standing from a sitting position, but it's really so I can sit at a bar. So, but you know, it's really wonderful chair. There's other aspects of other chairs that can raise the legs that mine doesn't do that. But it's, you know, a lot of people look at it and say, oh, you know, gee, poor me kind of thing. And, you know, it's just really, I'm fortunate to have my family around me who sees me and not the chair. And it's just a way for me to, you know, other people use their legs to get around. I use my wheelchair to get around. I have a ramp van that the ramp comes out the side of the car, and I have 121,000 miles on it in a little over 3 years. So I do get around. There's, you know, and these kinds of things really help me. And I've also been helped by polio support groups that are throughout the world. And I have a polio doctor who specializes in post-polio syndrome, and he has taught me, you know, the importance of not overusing my muscles and how to take rest breaks. Things like using high-protein diet, because protein helps reduce fatigue. Every day I try to stop for 20 minutes at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. just for 20 minutes, so that I don't hit the wall of fatigue. Prior to taking a lot of these steps, I'd get to 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and if I didn't sit down, I would fall down, hitting that wall of fatigue. Mm-hmm. And through the help of doctors and, you know, being part of support groups and being part of Rotary, I've learned what's important. And most polio survivors are A-type personalities, and it's very hard for them to slow down. And it was a very hard lesson for me. And since I've been doing that, I've not, and the combination of that and my wheelchair, prior to that, I was losing 8% of my muscle strength every year in my legs. I've not lost any muscle strength since being in a wheelchair and taking steps that are important. And the unfortunate thing is, for every case of paralytic polio, there's as many as 200 cases of polio where the person either has no symptoms or very few symptoms, like, maybe flu-like scenario. For those people, 30 to 40 years after getting polio, they also will have, 70% of them will also have post-polio syndrome. And because they didn't know they had polio, they get, diagnosed with diseases or issues called like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, which has similar symptoms, but totally different, treatments. Chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, they want you to exercise heavily and build muscle.
Mm-hmm.
That's the worst thing. For instance, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his first term, he was walking around in crutches. Towards the end of his life, into his last term, they had to carry him around because down in Warm Springs, Georgia, they didn't know about post-polio syndrome. The logical thing, he had weakened muscles, let's build those muscles. They put him through such extensive physical therapy, they destroyed his muscles. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things that polio survivors run into. And that's what we're trying to stop from happening by eradicating polio.
Well, I'm just thankful for you who can be a representative for the post-polio symptoms, especially for those that are getting diagnosed incorrectly.
Yeah. Well, thank you.